تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So continuing then from where we left off in Al-Aqeedah Al-Wasitiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, we got to the section now where he is going to speak about another one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is now the attributes of the hands of Allah. So he mentions here the ayah, the first ayah in this section. مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ. What prevented you from prostrating to that which I created, to whom I created with my own two hands? Of course, here it is Iblis who is being addressed. It is Iblis who is being spoken to. مَا مَنَعَكَ. What prevented you? مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ. What prevented you from prostrating to the one whom I created with my own two hands? So notice here something specific has been mentioned. Allah created all of the creation, but here in regards to Adam alayhi salam, of course, that specific point has been mentioned about his creation. The specific point that Allah created him with his own two hands, indicating the nobility and the virtue to Adam alayhi salam, that Allah created him with his own two hands, and the rest of creation do not participate in that characteristic. The rest of the creation do not participate with Adam in that characteristic of having been created by the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questions Iblis, and as we've mentioned before, these questions in the Quran, they are not questions because an answer is needed. Allah already knows everything. But Allah is asking Iblis this question as a means of rebuke upon him. It is a rebuke, su'al istinkar. Now what is it that prevented you? Why did you not prostrate? What prevented you from prostrating? It is a rebuke upon Iblis. It is istifham lit-tawbih. It is a means of rebuking Iblis for his action, which was out of arrogance and haughtiness and envy. As Iblis mentions, or Allah mentions to us regarding Iblis, that he said, أَأَسْجُدُ لِمَنْ خَلَقْتَ طِينًا. Should I prostrate to the one that you created out of clay? Iblis considered himself superior. He considered himself greater and higher in rank and status than Adam alayhi salam. And one of the reasons was Because Iblis considered himself to have been created from fire and Adam to have been created from clay. And so Iblis considered he was superior to Adam in creation. That fire is superior to the clay that Adam alayhi salam was created from. But the reality is, as Shaykh Abdul Rahman Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned in his tafsir, the reality is that Iblis was misguided in his analogy. He was misguided in his thinking. Fire does not make him superior to the clay. Rather, clay is superior to fire. Because when you think about the two things, fire, when it touches something, it simply destroys it. Fire, when it touches something, destroys it. When the fire goes upon the ground, it burns everything that it touches upon the ground, destroys and kills. Whereas the earth, the soil, it is a means of growth. The soil and the earth and the clay that comes from it, that is all a means of nurturing and growth. Whereas fire, whatever it touches, it simply eats it up and destroys it. And if you put the fire on top of the ground, it will destroy that area of the ground. But eventually that area of the ground will grow again, eventually. But if you put the ground, the soil, the clay onto the fire, it will completely extinguish the fire and the fire will not come back. So for various reasons, as Shaykh Abdul Rahman Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, it cannot be said that the reasoning of Iblis was correct. Fire is not superior to clay. Rather, the clay in reality is superior to the fire in these regards. So Iblis, from this misguided thinking of his, and from his envy, and from his arrogance and haughtiness, refused to prostrate, even though Allah commanded them all to prostrate. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Allah tells us that when we told all of the angels to prostrate, when we told all of the angels to prostrate to Adam, they all prostrated. Illa Iblis, except Iblis. Even though Iblis was not from the angels, but nevertheless he was up in the heavens amongst them. He was elevated previously up in the heavens amongst the angels. And so when Allah gave the command to the angels, it was inclusive of Iblis. He was there amongst the angels, inclusive of him to prostrate to. But Allah says, Abba, he refused, wastakbara, and he was arrogant and haughty, and he was from the disbelievers. As Shaykh Al-Fawzan Hafidhahullah Ta'ala mentioned, this incident of when Iblis refused to prostrate was the first incident when envy occurred. That was the first incident of envy occurring. The envy that Iblis had prevented him from prostrating to Adam alayhi salam. And then that envy continued in through mankind, and it exists amongst those with diseases in their hearts to this day. And so as Shaykh Al-Fawzan mentioned, envy is an old disease. Started from Iblis himself at that time, when he envied Adam alayhi salam, that Allah had created Adam with his own two hands, and that Allah had taught Adam alayhi salam the names of everything, and given this great virtue and status and rank to Adam alayhi salam, such that he commanded all the angels to prostrate to him. So envy engulfed Iblis, and that was the beginning of envy, which then continued on in mankind. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to Iblis, what is it that prevented you from prostrating to Adam? Basically, that is the intent here, that I created with my own two hands. And notice in this ayah, it is the dual that is mentioned. It is the dual that is mentioned. Biyadayya, with my two hands. That I created with my two hands. يعني نعم بيدي وهي صيغة تثنية. That is the form of the dual in Arabic. بيدي. It is the muthanna and it is mudaf ilayhi, and therefore the noon is removed. بيدي, indicating the dual. So in this ayah, في هذه الآية توبيخ أو توبيخ إبليس في تركه السجود لما خلقه الله بيده. So there is a rebuttal of Iblis in this ayah for his refusal to prostrate to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, which also therefore highlights the attribute of creating, the attribute of creation, إثبات صفة الخلق, that Allah creates, Allah is the creator, Allah is al-Khaliq. لما خلقت بيدي, what I created with my two hands. So it is an affirmation in this ayah of the attribute of creation, and also an affirmation of the attribute of the hands, the two hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ففيها إثبات اليدين لله سبحانه وتعالى، اليدين اللتين بهما يفعل كالخلق هنا. So there is an affirmation of the two hands of Allah, that Allah does what He wishes with, and in this instance Allah created with them. اليدين اللتين بهما يقبض. And there are many other ayat where it mentions what Allah does in regards to this attribute of His hands. In one of the ayat it mentions how Allah will grasp everything, take a hold of everything. وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ وَالْأَرْضُ جَمِيعًا قَبْضَتُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. That they have not apportioned the due right to Allah, and the earth, all of it will be in the grasp, in the handhold of Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَبِهِ مَا يَأْخُذْ, and Allah takes with His hands. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى يَأْخُذُ صَدَقَةً فَيُرْبِيهَا كَمَا يُرْبِي الْإِنسَانُ فُلْوَةً. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the charity and increases it, just as a person increases in his agriculture and affairs. وَقَوْلُهُ لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ فيها أيضا تشريف لآدم عليه الصلاة والسلام حيث خلقه الله تعالى بيده. So also, as we mentioned, there is an honor and nobility for Adam alayhi salam in this ayah, because Allah highlights that He created him with His own two hands. وَقَالَ أَهْلُ الْعِلْمِ, and some of the scholars they mentioned, كَتَبَ اللَّهُ التَّوْرَاةَ بِيَدِهِ, that Allah had written the Tawrat with His own hand. وَغَرَسَ جَنَّةَ عَدْنٍ بِيَدِهِ, and that Allah planted the Garden of Eden with His own hand. So these are three things that are mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did with His own hand: creating Adam alayhi salam, planting in the Garden of Eden, and the writing of the Tawrat. And that is mentioned by some of the scholars in some of their books. Also, Shaykh al-Uthaymeen mentions something here which is very relevant to the topic of the creation of Adam alayhi salam. He says, لَعَلَّنَا بِالْمُنَاسَبَةِ لا ننسى ما مر من قول النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام إن الله خلق آدم على صورته. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam upon his appearance. Allah created Adam upon his appearance. وذكرنا أن أحد الوجهين الصحيحين في تأويلها أن الله خلق آدم على صورة التي اختارها واعتنى بها ولهذا أضافها الله إلى نفسه إضافة تشريف. And one of the meanings of that Allah created Adam upon his appearance, is that Allah selected the appearance that Adam was going to have. That appearance was from Allah selecting for Adam what appearance Adam was going to have. And that's why Allah attributed it to Himself, that it is the appearance. Allah created Adam upon his appearance, i.e. the appearance that Allah selected for Adam alayhi salam. So that is one of the explanations of what that means. There is an opinion of some of the scholars that they created Adam upon his own appearance. And even if that was the case and that was the explanation, we've already mentioned before how to understand those kinds of things. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it would never be able to be said that there was a resemblance and comparison in Adam to Allah. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Even upon that explanation, if a person understands those principles we mentioned at the start of the book, then it will make it very easy to understand all of these names and attributes as we go through, that there is nothing comparable to Allah. So we affirm the two hands of Allah, but we don't imagine them like any hands we have or anything in creation has. There is no comparison, there is no resemblance, there is nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is the first ayah that is mentioned regarding the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second ayah that is mentioned as an evidence here is وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَلُعِنُوا بِمَا قَالُوا بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ يُنْفِقُ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ. That the Jews, they said, the hand of Allah is shackled, tied. Rather, their hands be tied, and they were cursed for what they said. Rather, the hands of Allah are open, widespread, and He gives to whom He wishes. So the Jews, they claimed that the hand of Allah is tied. And Allah says, their hands be tied. And they were cursed for what they said. Rather, the hands of Allah are widespread and He gives to whom He wishes. So this statement is mentioned in the Quran from having been from the Jews, that they said Allah's hands are tied, and what they meant by that was that Allah is unable to give to whom He wishes from His creation. That Allah is tied and held back and unable to give to His creation whom He wishes. And this is highlighted in another ayah of the Quran when Allah said in Surah Al-Isra number 29, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدَكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَى عُنُقِكَ, and do not make your hand tied up to your neck. And the meaning and the tafsir of that ayah is, do not hold back from spending. Do not tie your hand back, stopping yourself from spending. Rather spend in the path of Allah. So the example in that ayah is given of someone not spending, not being able to give, as his hand being tied. So that is what the Jews meant in this ayah when they said the hand of Allah is tied, that Allah cannot give to His creation. Allah is restricted and unable to give to His creation. And that's like what they said in Surah Ali Imran, Inna Allaha faqirun. In Surah Ali Imran 181, when they said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in poverty, Allah is poor, they claimed. So here they are saying the same kind of thing, that Allah is restricted, unable to give, in poverty. And they were told that they are cursed upon what they said. Rather, Allah's hands are widespread and He gives to whom He wishes. So when they said that Allah's hand is tied, it's because they said, لولا أنها مغلولة لكان الناس كلهم أغنياء. They said, if Allah's hand wasn't tied, then everybody would have been rich. Allah would have given to everybody and everybody would have been rich, but they're not. So that must prove that Allah's hands are tied, they said. That must prove that Allah's hands are tied, they said. فكونه يجود على زيد ولا يجود على عمر هذا هو الغل وعدم الإنفاق. So they said the fact that Allah is generous to one person but not to another must show that Allah's hands are tied. This was their accusation and lie upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when they said that Allah is poor, when they said Allah is poor, they quoted, or they were giving the explanation of when Allah mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. Who will give Allah a good loan? They said, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need. فقالوا للرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام يا محمد إن ربك افتقر. They said, look, O Muhammad, your Lord has fallen into poverty. The ayah is saying, who will give a good loan to Allah? They said, no, Muhammad, look, your Lord has fallen into poverty. صار يستقرض منا, that He is taking loans from us. قاتلهم الله. This was their evil statement and evil speech. Also from amongst what they said, وقالت اليهود أيضا إن الله عاجز. They said Allah is incapable, weak. لأنه حين خلق السماوات والأرض استراح يوم السبت. They said when Allah created the heavens and the earth, He took a rest on Saturday. And they said this shows that Allah is incapable and has weakness in Him. وجعل العطلة محل عيد فصار عيدهم يوم السبت. And they said that the Saturday was therefore a holiday. That Allah created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and then rested on Saturday. So the Saturday is the holiday, Yom al-Sabt, Sabbath as they say. So that is the holiday that they took. So here in specific, in this ayah specifically, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ. In the previous ayah, Allah said, what I created, لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ, two hands. But in this one they say, يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ, the hand of Allah is restricted and tied, meaning one. This is mufrad, whereas in this other one it was على صيغة تثنية. So what does this mean? أفردوها لأن اليد الواحدة أقل عطاء من اليدين اثنتين ولهذا جاء الجواب بالتثنية والبسط فقال بل يداه مبسوطتان. The Jews, when they said Allah's hand is tied, they mentioned it as one, in order to belittle the affair even further. Because how much can you give with one hand compared to how much you can give with two hands? Which one can you give more with? Two hands. With one hand you can only give less amount you can give with one hand. So they were trying to belittle even further by mentioning only one hand. And that the one hand of Allah is restricted, let alone two. That even with the one hand Allah cannot give. And so when Allah rebuked them, the rebuke came in the fullest form by mentioning both hands of Allah. بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ. Rather, both hands of Allah are open and widespread. And He gives to whom He wishes. يُنْفِقُ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ. وَلَمَّا وَصَفُوا اللَّهَ بِهَذَا الْعَيْبِ عَاقَبَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِمَا قَالُوا. So when they attributed to Allah this evil, this shortcoming, this deficiency, then Allah recompensed them with the same thing. They were recompensed. Their end result and the consequence was the same as what they were claiming. غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. Their hands were then tied up. أي منعت عن الإنفاق, so they would not spend. ولهذا كان اليهود أشد الناس جمعا للمال ومنعا للعطاء. That's why you see that the Jews are the greatest of the people in their miserliness, in gathering the money and not spending it. فهم أبخل عباد الله. They are the most miserly of the servants of Allah. وأشدهم شحا في طلب المال. And the greatest of them in their desire to gather the wealth. ولا يمكن أن ينفقوا فلسا. And they will not even spend a penny, as we say. إلا وهم يظنون أنهم سيكسبون بدله درهما. They will only spend even a penny if they think they can make a pound out of it. They will only spend a penny if they think they can make a pound out of it. ونرى نحن الآن. And then the Shaykh al-Uthaymeen gives some examples of some of the affairs that have been witnessed in real life also. So then in the ayah it also mentions وَلُعِنُوا بِمَا قَالُوا, that they were cursed upon what they said. And the curse of Allah, أي طُرِدُوا وَأُبْعِدُوا عَنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ, that they were expelled and thrown away, distanced away from the mercy of Allah. فهم لما وصفوا الله بالإمساك طردوا وأبعدوا عن رحمته. قيل لهم إذا كان الله عز وجل كما قلتم لا ينفق فليمنعكم رحمته حتى لا يعطيكم من جوده. That if you're claiming, the end result for them was that if you are claiming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is restricted and cannot give, His hands are tied, then you need to be distanced and separated and expelled from the mercy of Allah. Because if it's the case, like you said, Allah cannot give, then Allah cannot give you any mercy then. Allah's hands are tied, He cannot give you mercy. Then go, be separated and be expelled and be cast away. And you say Allah cannot give and is restricted, so be it. You will not get any of the mercy of Allah, then Allah cannot give, you said. You will not get the mercy of Allah, and you will not get that goodness from Allah, and you are separated and expelled from that generosity of Allah. فَعُوقِبُوا بِأَمْرٍ. So their punishment was upon two affairs. بِتَحْوِيلِ الْوَصْفِ الَّذِي عَابُوا بِهِ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ. Firstly, by the description that they were placing upon Allah, that evil of saying that Allah is restricted, that was cast upon them. And they became miserly and restricted in their affairs. And secondly, بِإِلْزَامِهِمْ بِمُقْتَضَى قَوْلِهِمْ. To hold them to account upon what they were saying. They were saying Allah's hands are tied and He cannot give. So then it was said to them, okay, good, then go. Allah can't give you any mercy, His hands are tied. So they were punished from that angle also. حَتَّى لَا يَجِدُوا جُودَ اللَّهِ وَكَرَمَهُ وَفَضْلَهُ. So that they do not find the generosity and the kindness and the mercy and the virtue from Allah. ثُمَّ أَبَطَلَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى دَعْوَاهُمْ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nullified and finished off their claim by saying clearly, بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ. Rather, the two hands of Allah are widespread. لأن المقام مقام تمدح بالكرم. That this is a situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praised upon His generosity. والعطاء باليدين أكمل من العطاء باليد الواحدة. And Allah giving with two hands is more deserving and gives a greater impact in the meaning than giving with only one hand. So who can possibly count the amount that Allah gives His creation? من يحصي ما أنفق الله منذ خلق السماوات والأرض. Who can possibly enumerate and count how much Allah has given since He created the heavens and the earth? لا يحصيه أحد. No one can enumerate and count that. ومع ذلك نعم. And despite Allah giving everything He gave, nothing is taken away or decreased from His kingdom. As Allah said in the hadith قدسي يا عبادي لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم قاموا في صعيد واحد فسألوني فأعطيت كل إنسان مسألته ما نقص ذلك مما عندي إلا كما ينقص المخيط إذا غمس في البحر. That, O my servants, if all of you, from the first of you to the last of you, the humans and the jinn, were upon one plane of land and everybody asked me for what they wanted and I gave everyone what they wanted, it would not decrease from my kingdom except that which the needle decreases from the water of the ocean when it is dipped in. Meaning nothing. It does not decrease from the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what He has bestowed and given to His creation. We'll have to stop for the prayer. Prayer is now. Huh? We'll have to stop for the prayer then. Slightly short. But inshaAllah ta'ala we'll conclude and continue with this the next time. Next week, what time is Isha? خلاص. Next week we'll have time properly inshaAllah ta'ala. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.